Hello, I'm Michael Cantrell, and you are listening to the Prison Officer Podcast, a place to have a conversation about the forgotten cops that work in this country's jails, prisons, and correctional centers. A place for me to try to make sense of a career spent working inside the fence with some of the greatest people that nobody sees or recognizes for the important job they do to keep this world safe. If you love this podcast, hit the follow button, or better yet, share with your family, friends, or coworkers. In more than 28 years of corrections, I have used or supervised PepperBall hundreds of times. Now, as a master instructor for PepperBall, I teach others about the versatility and effectiveness of the PepperBall system. From cell extractions to disturbances on the rec yard, PepperBall is the first option in my correctional toolbox. With the ability to transition quickly from area saturation to direct impact with the non-lethal PAVA projectiles, PepperBall provides me with a range of non-lethal options for cell extractions involving non-compliant inmates, and when the use of force is over, decontamination is easy, with no oily residue on the walls or floors. To learn more about PepperBall, go to www.pepperball.com or click the show notes below. PepperBall is the safer option first. Well, hello, and welcome back to the Prison Officer Podcast. My name's Mike Cantrell. I'm glad you're here to join us again. I've got a guest today, and she's going to bring some light to some of the stuff that, a lot of us haven't experienced or seen. JoAnn Mertens, and she worked 44 years in the Missouri Department of Corrections. And so she has seen stuff all the way through. I started in the 90s, and I thought that was early. But, to go back to 1966, and especially to be a female, that early in the prison systems had to have been a challenge. And I'm sure we're going to hear some of that from her. So I'm going to bring in JoAnn, and welcome to the Prison Officer Podcast, JoAnn. I'm glad to have you on here.
Well, Mike, thank you very much for having me. I'm excited about it.
Oh yeah, it's you're a rare treat, because let alone finding somebody that worked that long in corrections, and then to find a female or a woman who worked that long, I think that a lot of people are going to be really interested in your story. So,
All right. Well, I'll do my best.
I know. So I always like to start off at the beginning. Tell me where you grew up, and how you grew up, and kind of family life and stuff like that. What was it like when you were little?
Well, I don't know how many people in this podcast has ever heard of the town Chamois, Missouri, but it's a little about 40 minutes away from Jefferson City, the capital. And that's where I was born and raised. And my dad died when I was 5, so my mom raised me as a single mother. And I went
Oh,
through the usual high school, and I did get a scholarship to a college, but I didn't know what I wanted to do. So I
uh-huh.
went to St. Louis right after high school, got a job there at the place that they called Department of Welfare back in the day. And it's now
Okay.
social services.
Right.
But I didn't like the big city, so I came back here and still transferred to Department of Welfare. And during that
Uh-huh.
time, I became a single mother. And I knew that I couldn't make much money on a clerk one salary. So I got a
Right.
call from Missouri State Penitentiary, MSP, and
Mhm.
about a clerk two job. We had the merit system back at that time. And so I
Right.
went there and I was interviewed and I got the job. And it was a job in the mailroom at MSP. And
Okay.
at that time, females were not allowed to go down inside. So,
hmm
what? Oh,
I was just agreeing.
oh,
Yeah. Yeah.
okay. And so they put me outside the warden's office. And the men in the mailroom had to bring the mail for me to work on. And that was my first uh, encounter with people not being too happy because they were not happy with bringing the mail up to me from way down inside. So later,
Right.
yeah, I mean, they were obvious about it. But
Uh,
later, the third floor, well, you worked at MSP, right?
Yes,
The
yes.
third floor had a space and they made the mail room up there. So I went to the third floor and so did all of the men. And then we hired a couple more women in the mail room. So they weren't as unhappy at that time. But before I forget it, I wanted to say that while I was working in the warden's office, I saw the first marriage ever, and I don't even know if they've had any more, in the penitentiary. And it was Ben and his sweet Jean. And
Oh, wow.
it was right outside the warden's office. A preacher came, there was flowers, there was nobody else. The warden's secretary was the witness, and I was a witness. So that was one of the first, and I don't know if they've ever had any more since then or not. But
That's interesting. I wonder why he got specially picked for that. Do you know?
well, they pushed on that.
Hmm?
Somebody did. I can't remember who, whether he did or he went to some outside person or whatever. And it
Right,
was really a push by somebody to do it, probably political push. you know.
right,
But
right.
anyway, while I was working the mailroom, they had one corrections matron, they called her, worked the visiting room,
Uh-huh.
and she needed some help because it was uh, open every day but Monday. And so I don't know why, but the warden asked me if I would consider it. And more money, that's what I wanted. But I will
Right.
say, when I first started there, there was something about the place that absolutely fascinated me. And I knew it was a place I wanted to work and that I might work up. So I had that in mind. And so
Hmm.
I took the test for corrections matron. And I wasn't good at cooking and sewing and all of this stuff, but I took the test, passed it. So I became a part time worker in the visiting room at MSP. And
Yeah.
then a couple of years later, they changed us to corrections officer ones. And this was a funny thing, too. I went in one day, I heard corrections officers were getting a raise, and I didn't get one. And I walked into my boss, who was one of the deputy wardens or associate superintendents or whatever they wanted to call them back then. And I asked why I
Right.
didn't get the raise. And he said, well, that was just the men. So,
Wow. That blatant, huh?
yes. And I
Yeah.
protested it, and later we got the raise. But
Yeah.
um,
So you mentioned
go ahead.
with the matron, what were some of the questions? I mean, you mentioned cooking and stuff. Is that more what was the role of the matron, I
Well,
guess?
see, the matron was the ones that worked with the females in Tipton. And so it was a
Okay.
completely different test than the CO1s. And it was more about cooking, cleaning, you know, not much about
Right.
inmates at all. But anyway, they
Kind of like the difference in high school, they had shop and they had
home
home
ec,
ec.
you're
And
right.
years ago, you didn't go, the girls all went to home ec and the guys went to
That's
shop.
exactly right.
Interesting.
Yes.
Wow.
So I became a corrections officer, but I also didn't work full time there because she worked more of it. And so during that
Hmm.
time, it was beneficial to me that I moved around and I worked in the engineering, I worked in the deputy warden's offices, I worked in the mail room, I worked in classification, I worked in all of those areas whenever they needed somebody. So that gave me
Hmm.
more information about the running of the whole place. And
Absolutely.
that was good for me. And so I kept on doing that. And I have to tell the story. I think I mentioned it to you, but when I was sitting on the switchboard, I also worked the switchboard. Well,
Hmm.
I read the St. Louis paper while I was working the switchboard, and I recognized that the wife of one of the inmates there in the prison was wanted for bank robbery. So,
Oh,
guess what? One
cool.
day on the weekend when I was working, here came this woman. And I called the warden at the time. He called the highway patrol. Sure enough, she was wanted, and they came in and arrested her. But they were men, so I had to take her in and strip search her. And
Uh huh.
I didn't like that idea, but I did. And I was going through her hair and I pulled a wig off. And in the middle was a
Oh.
little thing of hair with a knife stuck through it. But
Oh wow.
she gave it up willingly. And so they took her off to jail. So that was my first commendation ever that I caught a bank robber.
That's a pretty cool commendation.
Yes, it is.
I don't know if many people get that in their career.
I know. And,
Yeah.
there was so many things in the visiting room I couldn't hardly even begin to tell. It was the minimum security were in an open area. The maximum
Mhm.
security were behind a screen. And you had to watch that screen that they didn't poke through it and do something. I met serial killers, uh, crazy. One guy kept, after the family was visiting him, he kept falling on the floor and laying there, and you couldn't get him up. And supposedly he ate light bulbs. So there's just such stories. But and
Right.
one guy tried to pay me for letting him take something in. He threw me a whole wad of cash, and of course I got him too. And I
Right.
won't go
Right.
on with the visiting room much, but there was just one thing that I had to check the women, their pockets. I had to search them, and I had to look in their purses. And I found this little silver container of brown stuff. And I was 24, 25 years old. I thought I had caught some dope. And boy, I set her down there and I ran out to the front gate officer and I said, "What is this? Is this dope?" And he looked and he said, "That's snuff."
Oh.
So I
Yep.
learned the difference between snuff and dope. But anyway, I
Yeah.
stayed there about 8 years. And then that was at the time, I don't know if you remember hearing about this, that a very progressive director came in and he wanted to separate all the institutions from the main penitentiary. At that time, they were satellites. And
Right.
so he separated them all. And the man that I worked and had to talk control center with, his name was Bill Turner, and so many people remember him. He was picked to
Yep.
go out there to Wren's Correctional Center and make it a separate institution. And he asked about 5 or 6 of us to go with him. And the warden
Mm-hmm.
told him, "You've got to get replacements." And so he got a woman, a very well known woman called Lillian Bonds, that worked there for years.
Uh-huh.
She took my place, and she was the first black female. I was the first white female, along with Dorothy Mays, to be a corrections officer, but she was the first black female. And later on, she
Right.
worked the round gate and, all of those kind of things. But so
Sure.
after that, from 1966 to 1974, I worked at MSP. Then after that, I went to Wren's. So
Mm-hmm.
that's, I can't even begin to hardly tell you about Wren's. It would last too long. We went from,
No, Rinse should be pretty interesting because that was an all-female joint. What I know of it, which I didn't know about it until the '90s, but it was an all-female joint. A lot of the fruits and vegetables for the department were raised there.
it was not
Lots of
a, it
escapes.
was not an all female joint.
Oh, it was.
No.
I'll be darned. Well, fill me
When
in.
I went in there in 1974, it was a minimum security male institution. And I was the only
I didn't.
woman there. Do you ever hear the name George Lombardi, the previous
Yep.
director? And he's passed
Yep.
away, rest in peace. But he was a psychologist down in the basement. And I was the only woman there. They didn't even have a lock on the bathroom door. And it just could go on and on. But then
Yeah.
there was a stabbing at the female institution at Tipton, and the
Okay.
superintendent there was badly injured. So we got the call. I guess they thought we could do anything. I don't know, but we got the call that we were receiving the killer, the female killer, or attempted murderer, let's put it that way,
Right.
of the superintendent. We were getting her and somewhere around 50 hardcore women, but we were keeping the men. And
Oh,
so Ren's became the first co-correctional institution ever.
that sounds like a mess.
Oh, I could go on and on with that story. But can you imagine what we had to do? We had to ship men out, we had to ship women in, we had to get all kinds of supplies for women that we did not have. And
Right.
I can still see, and I was the only female officer. And I worked, I don't know how much overtime, but we finally got another one that worked it, and then later more. But when I saw those females walking off the bus, that was the baddest looking crowd of people I had ever seen.
Right.
And we did co-corrections for 10 years. And then,
So were they separated
well,
by fences?
not well, by one little fence. The men were in a dormitory by themselves, and the women were
Okay.
in a dormitory. But oh my heavens, we tried them in church together. That did not work at all.
Right. Yeah.
We had to feed them separately. It was everything. And I'll tell you one quick story. We confiscated a pair of sweatpants from a woman that she had sewed a zipper in the bottom of it. Do you get
Wow.
my gist?
Easy access. Yeah.
And we went
I'll be
on for
darned.
10 years. And then I can't remember the exact year, but then that's when Vandalia and Chillicothe opened. And
Uh-huh.
then we went back to all men again. And I forget how many years that went. But then in, I want to say, the late 80s, we got the women again, and every man was shipped out. And
Right.
we got every kind, even though they had Chillicothe. They didn't have Vandalia yet. That's a mistake. They had Chillicothe, and so we got all the bad ones there. And we had to make ADSEG. We had to do all of these kind of things to accommodate the women. And they did escape. The men escaped, but so did the women. And
Sure.
it was just such a mess. And then on top of that, I don't know if you ever remember the Missouri floods. But
Yep, that's when I remember friends, because I was at MSP at the time.
yes,
And we helped some of those.
yes. And
Yep.
we were moved in and out constantly. I mean, almost every year. And then we got a new director, the first female director. And we were all, with the men had moved out, we had all women. And the 1993 flood came along, and it was called the 500-year flood.
Mm-hmm.
Well, we thought we were going, actually, my boss, Bill Turner, retired in 1990, and I thought I had worked my way up through the ranks. I had been a sergeant, first female sergeant, first female record officer, first female
Wow.
record officer 2, and then I got to what they call then Superintendent 1, but they're deputy wardens now. And I
Right.
got that far. And when he retired, I was just totally confident that I'd get the position. But it didn't happen that way. And
Right.
I'll just say politics got into it. And
Yeah.
I won't say any further than that. But the guy came out. My mother called him the pup. And so I basically had to train him. He'd never worked with women at all. And
Wow.
it's a difference with the two of them. And I do want to say in here, I want to get this point across for people. Women are easier, men can work with women easier than vice versa. They can calm them down. My boss could come in and calm those women down where they almost fought when I was in there, and vice versa.
Really?
Yeah, I could calm the men down where he couldn't. So it's not in every, not in every
Right.
circumstance, of course, but basically. And I would much rather work with the men than I did the women. And my story was always firm, fair, and consistent. And to me,
Yeah.
um, that is what you have to live by. And most of them respect you. Not everybody's going to, but I had the respect, particularly of the male inmates. And I want to tell you, if I can, one story.
Of course.
I was working with the minimum security male inmates at Ren's, and well, actually, no, I'll have to go back. That was maybe at Church Farm, so I don't know if I should tell you the story first. But here's the basic story. I had to approve people for work release. Well, I didn't approve this guy because I looked at the file and it just wasn't right. So I walked around for at noon hour for just a little exercise. Well, I heard the words coming out of a housing unit, "Ms. Mertens, you old bitch." And I knew who it was, but I couldn't
Right.
see him, so I couldn't technically write him up. Well, the afternoon after I was mad. Oh, I was mad. But
Right.
got in my office, and here came the lieutenant. He was just laughing and laughing. And I said, "What's going on?" He said, "Guess who asked for protective custody?" It was the guy. And
So he want protective custody from you?
yeah, no, those other inmates threatened him. See,
Oh, the other inmates did.
I
Oh,
had
wow.
some that would watch my back, and you didn't have to give
Sure.
them anything in return but fair, firm, and consistent.
Right.
And there was one that I just was through my whole career with, almost, was a guy named Porky. I don't know if you'd ever heard of him.
Not right off, but
It was Porky. He followed me to Ren's. He followed me to church. I mean, he was just in and out that much. And then
right.
there was a guy named One Arm, and he had one arm. And between those two, they were what they call the OGs. I'm sure you've heard of the OGs.
Right. Yeah.
Old gangster. And some people
Old
say now
gangster.
it's ordinary gangster, but no, it's OG. But
Yeah. That's what it was then.
yeah, and they were the old gangsters that protected me. And that's how I survived very well. Never had to give a snitch anything. Like some of the investigators promised them all kinds of stuff. I could get them to tell me without ever promising anything. In fact, I'd tell them,
Sure.
"You're not going to get anything out of this, but I want to know." And boy, there they went. But anyway,
Right.
back to the stories. When Rand's was shut down with the new director, we could never go back. My old boss that was retired offered to help fix it back up again, and no, they closed it down. So the women were moved to the back of Church Farm. Are you familiar with Church Farm?
Yeah, I've been there a few times. Yeah.
Okay. And in the back of it, there was a minimum security unit called MSU. And that's where the women were put. So once again, we had to get all of that settled for the women. Well, in that time, they were building Vandalia. And I forget how long we stayed there. It wasn't too long, but maybe a year. And we got everything set up for the women. And then they were getting ready to move to Vandalia. Well, Jefferson City was my home, and I certainly didn't want to move there. So luckily,
Right.
our director gave all of us that didn't want to go a prioritized transfer to where we could go anywhere that an opening came up. Well, a superintendent one came open at Church Farm, the main big church farm, and I grabbed
Right.
it. And the first day I walked in there, the staff members sat outside before they went to work and smoking and whatever, And I started walking in there and I thought, my heavens, there has never been a high ranking woman at Church Farm. And there had not.
Yeah.
So here I came. Once more, I
Once more.
had to deal with some of this stuff. And I haven't even told you all the stories. They could go forever. The discrimination, the craziness, the whatever. And I can tell you a few more if you decide later to hear some. But anyway, Kelly Locke, I don't know if you ever heard of him.
I remember the name.
Wonderful superintendent or warden or whatever you want to call him. He really was a blessing to me. And here's a story I have to tell. One day, there was two. He was a superintendent 3. There was 2 superintendent 2s, and I was a superintendent 1 because I never made it past the glass ceiling. And they were all gone. So guess who was in charge? It was me.
Sure.
Well, I heard there was something going on with one of the E Squad members and something in the main big building with the medium security men. And so I called this guy in, had my policy and procedure book laying there. And I said, anyway, why did you do this way? Because I thought it was the best way. And I said, but look at the policy and procedure of how you're supposed to do something. And he said, well, I don't believe it's the right way. And I said, well, are you going to do it the right way? And he kind of looked at me and he didn't answer. And I said, well, you got 2 choices. You do it that way, the policy way, or I will call an officer to escort you out. And he looked at me so funny. He did it my way and the policy way.
Yes.
And then later, while I was at Church Farm, Kelly Locke came to me, the superintendent 3, and said, JoAnn, how would you like to manage MSU, the minimum security place? And I thought, well, that's good. Get me out of all of this mess up here. So then I became sort of the total overseer of the 400-bed MSU unit. I still had to keep my jobs over classification in the big one. So I rode a cart from one place to the other. So I handled a job over in the medium security unit and a job in the minimum security unit. So then I got bored, and that was in 1997 that I went to Church Farm. And, minimum security men and not too many programs and whatever. And my son he had moved to Virginia, and he kept saying, Mom, why don't you come out? And so they had the 80 and out. I don't know if you've heard of that. Your years plus your service or your age equals 80. And I had it. So at 58, in June of 2000, I retired. Right. And, and now I hear that there was better things. There was a backdrop that I've missed out on, whatever. But I retired and moved to Virginia. And then I still loved law enforcement. I worked at a domestic violence shelter, which was not that really, and I stayed there a year. But then I became a part-time probation officer, and I also went into the big jail here for reentry. And reentry was big that time in Missouri and here. And so I got to go in the big jail, and I worked that about 8 years, I think, maybe 9 years. And they changed my position to full-time. And I was old enough at that time that I didn't want to do full-time. So I resigned. Sure. And then just staying in law enforcement until COVID, I worked at the big police department here in economic crimes. And that was a really interesting thing for me, too. And I had to call the victims of crime and explain all the things to them if we would or wouldn't do anything. So I have had an unbelievable amount of knowledge in the criminal justice system.
Sounds like it. Yeah. How many total years?
Oh, Lord. Well, 66 is when I started. Then I quit there in 2000. And then I came here and still worked in it and volunteered in the police department till the COVID hit. So, how many years is that?
Mhm. More than 50?
I guess
Yeah.
a lot of
Yeah.
years.
Well,
But
yeah.
the
Well,
stories,
that's,
stories could go on and on. But I
yeah.
would like to say, and women have come a long way in criminal
Hmm.
justice, but there's still a way to go. But the way I
Yeah.
handled it was standing up for my rights in every
Hmm.
instance, and it worked. And
Yeah.
can I tell you a couple of little stories?
Of course. Yeah.
Well, I was in the mailroom, and an old sergeant, an old man, I had to go back and weigh a package in the back room. And now he was
Hmm.
above me in rank and everything. But as I bent over, he popped my bra strap. Well, I just
Oh,
whirled around, pointed my finger in his face, and I said, "Don't you ever do that again." And he looked at me
sure.
shocked, and that was the last I worried about it. There was
Yeah.
another old captain that when I worked the visiting room, they would come in and try to knead my neck and arm and all of that. And luckily, he was shorter than me, and I
Mm.
got the front. I got the front gate officer to call me when he was coming up to check the visiting room, and I would stand and keep walking. So that
Right.
I got that.
Yeah.
But there were little remarks, and there were just innuendos and all of that. Now, I was not one, and I admire the women that now go into the prisons like a JCCC and stuff like that. I did not do that in the male maximum. I did do it, in the medium and the minimum. But I admire those
Sure.
women, and you know, I would have done it if I could, but they wouldn't let us go inside, and so
Oh, yeah.
yeah, and I would have,
I can tell you,
huh?
even in the 90s when I was at MSP, a lot of the females, and there weren't very many, there was only one female I remember, Dawn Brown, who worked inside the housing
Oh,
units.
really?
But like the second stuff, they were supposed to go towards the round gate
Yeah,
when we had, and that was the 90s.
yeah.
So I can't imagine 60s and 70s, 80s, you know.
Well, see, we could go down for lunch until we went down and a woman was grabbed by a mentally ill inmate. So that settled that.
Hmm.
And then we had to have male escorts. We could never go down inside. But the warden
Right.
would take us down sometimes on his cart. He had a cart. And he would take us down, and I saw the gas chamber. I went in the
Yeah.
hospital, and one guy reached out and grabbed me. I thought I was going to faint, but I found out he was mentally ill. you know, but the dining room, the control center, the hospital, and I did go to death row, and I did see that,
Uh,
and the gas chamber. And when I worked in classification, they had a vault there, and I filed in there. And on that wall was every person who had been put to death. And I had to sit there and look at
yep.
those pictures. And I don't know if
Hmm.
you ever remember Bonnie Hetty and the Greenlease case. Her picture and Austin Hall were on the wall. And I would look at those every day when I'd go in to file. And
Yeah.
my one boss said that if you ever witnessed an execution, you would be against the death penalty. I don't know,
Huh.
but he said it bothered
Yeah.
him so much. So
Hmm.
I don't know.
I think it's just from people I've talked to, I think it's a really individual thing. I think it bothers some people that you don't think it would,
Yeah.
and I think other people you think it would are able to handle it. I watched a video on YouTube a few months ago, and it was a warden in Louisiana, and he'd stood over I think 13
Oh,
executions, Didn't seem to, I mean, it was part of his job. He didn't have any animosity. He didn't have any, bad thing to say about it. He just looked at it like a doctor would.
Yeah.
And I thought that was pretty
And
interesting.
the law, it
So,
was the law and still
so,
is.
yeah, he's not the person that decided that's going to be
Yeah.
done. He's just, and that's all of us in corrections.
Yeah.
We carry weight that most people in law enforcement don't.
Mm-hmm.
We're the final. The judges, the policemen, everybody else makes these decisions, and then we have to take care of those people. We're not the ones that put them there.
Yeah. I don't know how I'd
So,
feel about witnessing one. I haven't decided that, but I don't want to.
yeah,
That's one of the things I don't want to do on my bucket list.
sure.
But one thing I do is every year when I go back, it's gotten less and less, but I always try to visit a prison. Now, actually,
Right.
only Algoa and JCCC. This year I went back and I met the warden there. And she,
Mm-hmm.
I can't walk very good anymore. She gave me a very small tour. My picture's on the
Mm-hmm.
wall there. If you ever go in, you
Oh,
can see my picture on the wall. And then we
cool.
sat down and discussed. She's a first female black warden that I know of, and we
Oh,
discussed
wow.
various things, about discrimination and everything. And
Yeah.
so I try to visit a prison, but it's getting now where you know there's hardly
Yeah.
any left around the Jeff City area, and I don't know many people. I don't have too much clout anymore. So, but I still love it.
So, yeah, a couple of your stories, you kind of talk like, and you can tell me if I'm right or wrong on this, but people had a lot of doubts and reservations about you being a female. But once you proved yourself, and I'm kind of going back to your book
Yeah,
too, once you proved yourself, it seemed like you were accepted at that point. But it was trying to get over that hump of trying to prove yourself. Is that accurate? Is that what you saw?
almost always, except for the time when the new guy came into Ren's and he had a little click. And then I had a lot more trouble. Um,
Uh,
but I overcame that as usual, and I kept good records and, all of these things. And so, but for most of the time, the inmates, I only had a couple of fights with male inmates, and I had a few with female inmates. But I remember, I have to tell you this story. There was a big
okay.
gal that was in there for rape because she and her boyfriend had raped, she had aided in raping a woman. And she
Yeah.
had a terrible background. And I remember she came up to me. She liked me for some reason. And she came up and she
Mm-hmm.
stood beside me about as big as I was. And she said, "What would you do if I did something to you?" I forget what she said. And I said, "Well, I'd
Mm-hmm.
just knock you totally down." And she looked at me and she said, "I bet you would." And we just had the best relationship.
Yeah.
And I could have probably never handled her.
Sure, but it's about convincing them that you could.
Yeah, that's true. And then I had another one, a woman called Heavy D. I don't know if you remember that name or not. He's a rapper or was a rapper. And
Yeah.
she took a liking to me. And when we went to Church Farm, there was somebody out of the minimum security unit that yelled, "Again, you old bitch." Some of the men liked that. And boy, she turned
Uh-huh.
around. She was beside me, and she was so mad. And she yelled up there. She said, "Yo, mama." He didn't. He shut up. And she was big as any man. So
Yeah.
I enjoyed working with the inmates. I really did. And there was
Mm-hmm.
the guy that brought our popcorn every day at Ren's, and was our canteen manager. When I got to read his file, he was on the end of a murder sentence for raping two old women after they were dead. And
Oh, wow.
after I read that, I could hardly eat the popcorn anymore.
I can understand that.
Yeah, it just,
My problem is pop.
But that's why you have to watch reading those files. But I had to, there was things I had to do, but it gave you a
Sure.
different perception. And I saw where you posted on your post about the woman with the drugs in the prisons.
Yeah, bringing the drugs into Licking Prison over there in Missouri.
Yes.
Yep.
And I really feel bad about that, but there are all kinds of tales. And she looked so young. I wonder if she was given any proper training, or if she fell in love. That's one of the things that happens. Uh,
Well, yeah, that's one of the talked about is that she had feelings for one of the
oh,
inmates.
okay. I had a
Yeah.
situation with our women. We had a cleaner,
Mm-hmm.
and she was really nice, but I could tell something was bothering her, but she was getting ready to leave. And we had a male officer who was a preacher, but still working there, that was working the housing units. Well, after Myrtle, her name was Myrtle, after she left, she called me and she said, "Ms. Mertens, I'm pregnant." And I said, "Myrtle, how far along are you?" And she gave me the time. And I said,
Uh-huh.
"You were pregnant at Ren's." And I
Well,
called out the officer that I thought, because we'd heard rumors. And she said,
mm-hmm.
"Yes." I said, "Why didn't you come to me?" And she said, "I was so afraid that I would not be able to leave when I was supposed to." But she said, "I wanted to, and now I want to tell you about it." Well, there was nothing we could do at that time, because she was in St. Louis and wouldn't testify. But so we had a
Right.
lot of hanky panky, going on.
And I've seen it in my career. We've just there was a federal warden that just got convicted, sentenced for the taking pictures and doing some other stuff with women out at Dublin. So it's in every prison, but you've got a viewpoint, and I kind of want to hear your viewpoint. So you mentioned that that girl was 22 years old, and that she was young. And did she get the training? What would you say to these young women, because there's a lot of them that come to work in prison these days? How did you stay away from it? How would you talk to other women about staying away from that? And men, I'm
Yeah.
not picking on women
No,
here.
because men are
I mean,
there
just
too.
as men, they absolutely are, but you kind of have a unique perspective from the female. What would you say to those young girls? How would you tell them to handle that?
Well, actually, the ones I saw more that fell for the guys was an older woman that was divorced, or I hate to say it, but going through menopause, or things like that. Now, we had younger ones too, but some of those, I think it's the circumstance in your life. And
Yeah.
maybe she didn't have a boyfriend. Maybe she was treated badly, and this guy, cons are cons. So
Yeah.
eh,
Yeah.
she didn't know him before, did she?
Not that I'm aware of. Now, during her interview there's two little bitty kids. Both of them are like under
Oh,
3
really?
in the back seat while she's doing her interview with the TV. So it's not like she hasn't had a boyfriend or a husband or
Yeah, yeah,
something.
that's true.
Uh, but yeah, it's too bad. Manipulation happens to every correctional officer
Yes,
in some form,
yes.
and how you stand up against it. A lot has to do with your integrity and the way you believe. But the one thing I've always taught: anytime you think you're getting manipulated, go tell somebody then, and immediately, before it gets big, because it always gets bigger.
Well, you know what I
You know
said to inmates when I was talking to them? I knew they were
what's that?
giving me a job, snow job. And I said,
Uh huh.
"Look, you can manipulate me only as far as I will let you." And boy, they looked at me
Yeah.
so funny. In other words, I was telling them, "I know you're trying to manipulate me." And
Hmm.
it worked most of the time. Sometimes you had to get a little hard on them. I remember
Yeah.
a guy, we had a group at Ren's, a reaching out group that I was so proud of, that that's probably one of my biggest things it's not a scared straight, it was called a reaching out. And the
Hmm.
juveniles would come in and we handpicked these guys. And they would talk to the juveniles. They even went into the Jefferson City High School once and was a total success. We could see how many drug abusers were in that high school. Anyway, this one guy winked at me. Well, I could have sent him immediately to the hole, but I got another woman to bring him in, and we sat there together. And I told him what I saw, what I didn't appreciate, what I could do to him. But if he could just behave himself, I would not send him to the hole. And boy, after that, he was, there's other ways of handling people. And
Yeah.
some work, some don't. You get some of those hardened criminals, and you're not going to, do anything with that. But that was a way I didn't have to send him to the hole, but I still got it stopped. And,
Right.
I always commanded the respect. They had to call me Ms. Mertens, or in the MSP, they would say Miss JoAnn. And you had to put that miss in front of it. If you didn't, they could go right to the hole. So, and I had do you remember the barber shop at MSP on the third floor? Or were you there?
Yeah. Yep. Shoe Shines is where we did our shift meeting and everything.
Yeah, I took my son up there to get his haircuts. But one day when I was working the visiting room, this inmate barber who was going to get out pretty soon, his name was Don. I can still remember. He came down. He always wandered around when he didn't have, people up there. And he was favored by the warden at that time. So he came up and he leaned against the visiting room desk and he said, now he called me JoAnn, and I didn't like that either. And he said, I'm going to get out pretty soon. I need somebody to show me the town. And I just looked straight at him and I said, well, Don, if you mean me and you step on my doorstep, the police will get there. Oh, I didn't mean you. I didn't mean you. He went over and over. But then I worried later that he might say something to that warden that favored him. But I got by with it, I never had any problem.
Well, you stood by your integrity.
Yeah.
That's the thing.
Yeah.
Even other people don't always do that, as long as you've got your integrity, that's what matters.
And I was very blunt. I've got one more story to tell you for sure of the saddest thing I've ever seen. I was working the visiting room, and of course there was the front gate officer, and this old man with a toothbrush and a bag in his hand came in there and wanted to come back in. He had been let out after a life sentence, and he had nowhere to go. And me as a visiting room officer and the front gate officer talked to him, but we had to turn that old man away. And he walked out of there so sad. We told him, in other words, you have to commit another crime to get back in. And I often wonder what happened to that old man. It was the saddest thing I think I'd seen.
Yeah, people don't realize some of the human stuff that we see like that. I worked at a medical center. I stood there bedside dozens of inmates when they died.
Oh, yeah.
And I there was one in your book that I wanted to ask you about. You talked about a pauper's burial that you saw. Tell me a little bit about that, because that seems like one of those human things that people don't realize that we sometimes have to be a part of.
Well, that was my boss was coming in, the new boss, and he wouldn't be there for 2 weeks. He took a vacation. And during that time, we had a fire, an attempted escape, and the death of an inmate. This was a female inmate. And she had some relatives, but I guess they didn't have the money or didn't want to fool at all with her. So we buried her somewhere in Jefferson City. There's a pauper's field. And we, as a staff, went together and bought a bouquet, because we went into the funeral home, and there she was sitting in there in this cardboard box and our little bouquet there. And then we went to the gravesite because there was no one else. And it was a rainy day, and I watched that cardboard box go down into that grave with water running into it. And I mean,
Wow.
that bothered me. But
Yeah.
we couldn't get the family to do anything. Maybe hardship, maybe they didn't like her. I mean, she wasn't the best inmate, but
Right.
but it was just
But
this, and she died of an asthma attack. Uh,
mm,
and so that was a very hard thing for me to take too.
sure, sure.
So,
Yeah, I've seen a lot of who were scared and dying alone,
mhm,
and the only person with them was a correctional officer.
yeah,
No family. They'd been abandoned or whatever.
yeah.
So yeah, people don't realize the humanity of our job sometimes. But so let me ask you about. I've got your book here. I've
Oh, I
mentioned it a
didn't
couple of
know that
times.
you even
One,
read it yet.
oh yeah,
Oh,
oh
okay.
yeah. One Free Prisons: The Rise
Mhm.
Within the Ranks, June 1966 to June 2000, by JoAnn Mertens.
Yes.
So what kind of got you? What made you write the book?
Well, I wanted to tell my story because I think I had a story to tell as being a first in so many instances. And
Yeah, absolutely.
I watch now on Women's History Month. I saw the other day on television they had a Women's History Month of a couple of athletes that had they looked to be 18 years old and they were making history. But they don't think
Yeah,
of the older ones that have been there, and plus criminal justice. How many do you see that make history in criminal justice? So
yeah.
I felt I had the story to tell. And believe me, I didn't know how to write a book. I just sort of did it I have a big box of papers here. I have everything
Uh-huh.
from my first performance appraisal to the one, which I haven't told you, but the one uh, disciplinary measure that my boss and I got together. It was only one in my life, but uh, I have all these things so I could go over them and remember things. So I had all that
Yeah.
information. I've still got it today. I don't know. I'll probably be thrown away when I pass away, but you know. But I just felt I had to do it, and I didn't have to work too long. It's a short book. It's simple, but
Yeah.
yeah, I just and another thing, I wanted single mothers to know that they can succeed and they can do
Yeah.
it on their own. That was another part of it. And then the fact of the prison system and the criminal justice system. And also the fact that I loved what I did. I could come home crying, but every day that I went in, I got that adrenaline rush and I loved
Mhm.
doing my job. Now, I didn't like all the people, but I loved doing my job. So
Right.
that's why I wrote the
No,
book.
there's some great stories in there.
There are,
So
and I can back them
yeah,
all
I'll
up.
put I bet. Yeah, I'll put a link to that in the show notes for anybody that wants to buy your book,
Oh, that's
so they
nice.
can find below this podcast, and yeah, read that and see just how much things have changed.
They have.
Because yeah, I go into prisons now because I still go out and instruct correctional
Oh, do
officers,
you?
and I've watched prisons that have 60% of the staff are women now.
Oh,
Maximum
really?
security prison.
Oh, wow.
Oh yeah, yeah, women, and I think some of it kind of plays to what you said. Single mothers,
Yeah.
correction does have, oh, how do I put this? With rotating schedules and
Hmm.
stuff, single mothers can sometimes work around those schedules that they couldn't with a traditional job.
Right.
You know, you get the benefits, you get the stuff. You were a successful single mother. Your son now works for NASA.
Yep.
Is that correct?
He's a PhD in
Yeah,
physics.
and that's something.
Yeah.
That you all that time and still were able to come home and be that good mother and help him in his life and career.
That
So
hard
yeah,
mother.
that's pretty.
He couldn't get by with
Yeah,
anything.
yeah, yeah. Sometimes as parents in corrections, we do bring that work home with us. Sometimes, yeah.
Yeah, I told him one time,
So
I said, I'd rather shoot you than see you behind those walls when he was doing something he shouldn't do. But he
Yeah.
appreciates it now. And,
Oh, absolutely.
and it's just,
Yeah.
he went to a totally different field. I kind of thought he might be a corrections officer, but he said, no, I don't want to do that. But he had his band entertain the inmates. Uh, he did his
Yeah.
Boy Scout project with getting a clothes drive for the inmates. And he and I met Chuck Berry at Wren's doing
Oh,
doing a show for community service.
isn't that something?
Yeah. I
Wow.
met Willie Nelson. Uh,
Yeah.
he was at MSP and I got to go there. And so, Sonny Liston, got to meet him.
Hmm.
So there are some perks to it.
Yeah. Yeah. It's amazing. You have an amazing story, and I thank you for sharing it with us. And maybe we'll get together and go over some more of these sometimes. But I really appreciate you coming on the podcast here. Do you have any last words? I mean, there's a lot of change going on in corrections right now as far as retention and recruitment. So you've got a bunch of new people who are coming into corrections. Do you got any words of wisdom for them?
Well, the main thing to me is fair, firm, and consistent. That is the
Yeah.
one thing. And then use your gut. I have always
Okay.
used my gut, and it has not failed me. And with the young people, it's a different breed now. I don't know exactly how to say it, but uh, it is a good career, and I have a good pension now in addition to Social Security. If I hadn't stayed with the state, I wouldn't have had. So that is
Sure.
another plus. And
Yeah.
for women, I think they have to, just use their common sense and work their way up. And just remember, here's another thing I told they had the female inmates that were in for murder started getting the 50-year stipulation. I don't know if that's still in Missouri or not, but you had to serve
Right.
50 years without parole. And I did tell them, they were whining and moaning and carrying on. And I said, with equal rights comes some things you don't want.
Yeah.
And so that was another thing. And I still know a couple that are sitting in there. In fact, one of them was on Dr. Phil just the last 3 or 4 months trying to get out from her 50-year stipulation. And so far, she
Oh,
has
no.
not gotten out. So,
Yeah.
some have, some haven't. So,
Right.
but it's just
Wow.
go in there and be self confident.
Yeah. Yeah. That'll carry you a long ways, won't it?
Yes. And don't be
So
afraid to say something.
yeah. Yeah. I think there was a time, that, like you said, the guy that came in rubbing your
Yeah.
shoulders, and you just kind of, got up and walked so that you didn't have to, because people probably wouldn't have taken that well
Oh, no.
if you'd have went and said something.
I could have never
But
filed
I
a
hope,
discrimination suit. Never.
yeah, I hope some of that's
Yeah.
gone. I hope that some of them feel comfortable enough that if that stuff's going on at work, they can step forward. I think we have grown some,
Yeah.
maybe not perfectly, but
Well,
some.
we had one captain there that just prayed after women, and we couldn't do anything about it, but the women knew I could handle him because I just said, hey, I'm not interested, but
Yeah.
we can be buddies. And he would come and tell me his stories of all things. But women would ask me how to handle him. I would get calls from women because he was something else. And anybody that's
Yeah.
been there as long as I have will know who it was. I think he's dead, bless rest his soul.
Well, thank you, JoAnn. I appreciate you being on here, and great stories, and maybe we'll get the chance to do this
Well,
again.
I had fun, and it may be my last hurrah with criminal justice. So,
Well,
but
you have a
I
good day.
look forward to hearing the podcast.
That sounds good.
Thank you.
If you enjoy these podcasts, the best way to support the Prisoner Officer Podcast is to share these episodes with your friends or family on social media. Let me invite you to visit www.theprisonofficer.com. If you haven't already, check out the Prison Officer Podcast on Facebook and click that little follow button. Or leave us a message, or better yet, leave us a review. And if you're listening to us on Apple Podcast, Google, or Spotify, please click the subscribe button. Till next time, I'm Mike Cantrell. Watch your back, And please take care of each other out there behind those walls.